Good evening, I'm Leah Zinder. This week, Close Up goes abroad. Every now and then, we believe it's important to take a look at Jewish communities outside of Israel, many of them suffering as a result of Muslim immigration and the intense anti-Israel sentiment that's sweeping Europe. This week, we travel to the capital of Sweden, a country we don't generally associate with anti-Semitism. Here's our report. Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Close Up, which this week visits Sweden, a country that until recently was considered one of the world's most successful liberal democracies. That's not the way it looks today to many of the 20,000 Jews who live here. The Swedish capital, with boats and water everywhere between the 14 islands comprising the city, is as prosperous and serene as ever. But under the surface, Stockholm, like other places in Sweden and in Europe, is struggling with problems of rapidly expanding immigration and a new incarnation of a painfully familiar phenomenon, anti-Semitism. This is Malmö, 600 kilometers south of Stockholm. Malmö has a tiny and rapidly shrinking Jewish community. 700 Jews live here, amid an influx of Muslim immigrants whose numbers have reached 50,000. Just 2 weeks ago, a makeshift bomb was hurled at the old synagogue in Malmö. It damaged but didn't destroy the building. Fortunately, no one was hurt. This was just the latest in a string of anti-Jewish hate crimes in Malmö, including vandalizing the cemetery, firebombings, graffiti, and verbal abuse in the streets. The mayor of Malmö, Ilmar Reepalu, says, "I'm against anti-Semitism," and, he adds, against Zionism. He recommends that Jews distance themselves from Israel if they want to prevent anti-Semitic attacks. Things have become so bad here that many of the younger Jews of Malmö decided to leave, some for Stockholm, others for Israel. Yaakov Gurman-Shat says he saw the writing on the wall 6 years ago. He now lives in Tel Aviv.
I had a very good childhood. I was never had any problems being Jewish, and I would never in my wildest fantasies think while growing up that I would once leave Sweden because of these reasons. And I think and I hope that at least here my children can grow up safe in that point of view, although there are a lot of other dangers here, but at least they won't have to be ashamed of them being Jewish.
Is Malmö typical of the Jewish experience in Sweden? And what is the source of these anti-Semitic attacks? Is it the influx of Muslim immigrants? Or is it the bitterly hostile attitude toward Israel adopted by the political and media establishment of the country? And what are the Jews of Sweden saying about the situation? These are some of the questions we try to answer on Close Up this week, on location in Stockholm. This is Rabbi Yitzhak Nachman, the Orthodox rabbi of Stockholm. He presides over a small but vibrant community that worships at the Adat Yisrael synagogue, a synagogue that survived Kristallnacht in Hamburg, Germany, and was sent over to Sweden for safekeeping. Ever since its inauguration in 1940, this synagogue has held morning prayer services every day of the week. But this is also a diminishing community. There are 140 funerals a year in the Jewish community, and only 5 weddings. And now, Rabbi Nachman, easily identifiable as a Jew by his kippah and beard, has more immediate problems. He's been verbally attacked and threatened on the streets of Stockholm twice in recent weeks.
It might be so that it has become more dangerous. And clearly the security department in the Jewish community told me not to always use some kind of a hat, not go with a
skull cap?
No.
With a kippah, and is that what you do in fact?
That's what I started to do reluctantly. I feel somewhat, and I do feel that the Jew should be able to go with a kippah on his head. It's a very dangerous path chosen by some politicians and some intellectuals to actually blame the victim for the anti-Semitism.
The Jews have a long history in Sweden, beginning centuries ago. The conservative community of Stockholm worships in this magnificent synagogue built in 1871. And the Swedes, who remained neutral throughout World War II, have a proud record of helping save 8,000 Jews from Denmark during the Holocaust. Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who saved thousands of Jews in Budapest in the same dark era, is memorialized in this controversial and, it must be said, odd sculpture erected by the government close to the Jewish center in Stockholm. One can't help feeling this towering hero deserves a more imposing monument. Now the Jewish school in Stockholm is busily preparing for the new school year. A teacher at the school, Jessica Rothschild, born in Stockholm like her parents before her, says she feels at home here and isn't afraid.
I don't know, I don't see the problem outside. I feel it when I read in the newspaper, or I feel it when I read about Malmö, the community, Jewish community in Malmö. But I don't feel it so close. But I don't wear Magen David.
You don't wear it, why?
Because I am afraid, so of course, that people will see that I'm Jewish. And my kids don't sing. They love to sing Jewish songs in the underground, but sometimes I change it to Swedish songs, or I let them just sing.
The entire Swedish Jewish community, 18,000 strong, feels threatened. The Jewish Community Center and the synagogues have heavy security and are protected with locks and bulletproof glass. A security officer who refused to appear on camera said, when events happen in the Middle East, like the flotilla, the Jewish centers are provided with round-the-clock police protection. Threats to community leaders are routine. And that's a problem for the leader of this community, for the first time in Sweden, a woman, Lena Posner-Kereshi.
The problem is, which we are fighting very hard here, is to make everyone, from the police, legislators, parliamentarians, the media, to understand that being Jewish is not necessarily the same as being Israeli. What's going on in Israel is not the same as what the Jews in Sweden. We are not responsible for what's going on in Israel. And this is problematic in one way, because of course we care and we would never accept any bashing. On the other hand, we are not responsible. So when there are demonstrations against Israel, all these demonstrations end up outside, not the Israeli embassy. They continue to the Jewish, the Jewish school or the Jewish community, regardless of where in Sweden. This is problematic because those who are against Israel are against the Jews. And these are not the Swedes. These are not necessarily the left-wingers. These are Muslim fundamentalists or Islamists.
Is it dangerous for a Jew who looks like a Jew to walk the streets of Stockholm, of Sweden today?
Most Jews today don't feel comfortable walking in certain areas in the country, in the various cities where there is a large Muslim population. And if you're a visible Jew, either because it's shown, because you look like an Orthodox Jew, the men, or if you walk around with a Magen David like I do, or you're a public figure like I am, of course you are bound to be cursed or abused in one way or another. Of course. This is the facts today.
You say, of course. It's shocking that you say, of course.
Because that's where we are today. That's where we are. If you're a visible Jew today, there are groups who would want to abuse you or verbally attack you or be aggressive.
And you don't really feel that you have the protection of your government, is that correct?
No. The thing is that, without going into details, the police and the authority are well aware of the situation, and so we are protected as individuals. But this is not an acceptable situation. And the government, even if we've been trying very hard, they don't understand, and there are two levels. One level is to get the protection we need. And for this, they need to identify and understand that this is a situation. The other thing is to work politically against its situation, to say that in a democratic society like Sweden, we have come to a situation when there are groups in this country, especially now the Jews, who can't feel free in the streets and can't feel comfortable. We've been here for 250 years. What's happening here?
The government of Sweden has become one of the most virulent critics of Israel's policies in recent years, especially when it comes to Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank. Now, this criticism, combined with a potent mix of latent prejudice, radical left-wing ideology, and Islamic incitement, all this has produced an ominous wave of anti-Semitism that is washing over Sweden. Anti-Semitism that is of concern to a young member of the Swedish parliament called Fredrik Malm.
The conflicts in the Middle East seems to catalyze some and activate some anti-Semitic feelings among probably a quite small group in Sweden, but at least they are here, and they are at least as many as they can cause trouble for people.
And the most worrying thing, I think, is that the man, I believe, is the Chancellor for Justice, very high official in the Justice Ministry, appears to be tolerant towards this anti-Semitism. What he is saying is that the very strict laws in Sweden against racism do not apply to anti-Semitism because of the conflict in the Middle East. Is that correct?
There are people who argue like that. I think that they are wrong. And there are also people who argue that all troubles in the world would be gone if just you find a two-state solution of the conflict in the Middle East. Like people should not blow themselves up in Iraq, or that terrorists in Somalia would end fighting if the Palestinians got a country and so on. And I don't believe in those. I don't think that Israel should be in the middle of the world all the time, in the middle of all conflicts, that everything has to do with Israel, that everything has to do with anti-Semitism and the Jews. I think that Israel should be a normal country, which we treat like we treat other countries in the world. And sadly, people don't really, and they mix it up, the conflict in the Middle East with the situation for Jewish people living in Malmö and Stockholm. It's sad that it should be that way.
Let me ask you a personal question, if I may. You are a young member of parliament, an up-and-coming young politician who obviously has personal ambitions as well, and you want to serve your country. It cannot be a very popular cause right now in Sweden to be defending the Jews. Why are you doing it?
When I look at it, I used to say that the Star of David, Magen David, we can choose now. We can choose if we want the Star of David to be on the Israel flag, or if we want the Star of David to be on the Jew in Treblinka. And that's the history has shown us that there is nothing in between there. I mean, if Israel would not be an independent country today, we don't even know how the situation would be like.
More typical are the views of another MP from the Green Party, named Mehmet Kaplan, a Muslim. He was 1 year old when his parents immigrated to Sweden from Turkey. Kaplan was on board the May 31st Turkish flotilla to Gaza, though not on the Mavi Marmara. He says the Ship to Gaza Sweden organization is planning to launch another flotilla before the end of this year. Talking to us in the Swedish parliament, he says he has visited Israel twice, has friends there, and denies that his fierce criticism of Israel, mostly for its Gaza policies, is based on anti-Israel prejudice or anti-Semitism.
I don't pretend that we can understand fully what's happening in the area, but we can understand that people, civilians, are suffering from the blockade. They are suffering, and as a humanist, as people living in a modern country like Israel and like in Sweden, we have to protest, we have to do things about this.
But here's the problem as I see it, and I'm not here to discuss, I'm not here to claim that everything that Israel's government does is correct. I don't think that's the issue. The point is, as we both know perfectly well, hundreds, if not thousands, of Muslim civilians are being killed in Afghanistan. Correct? By the Allied forces. We don't hear a word of protest about that. There is this insistence on bashing Israel, and this is used by Israel's enemies around the world to delegitimize Israel. And what I see here in Sweden in the short time that I've been here, but judging from what people have told me, and you know it very well, in places like Malmö, this Israel bashing has turned into a real threat to the Jewish community of Sweden.
I can say like this: I am one of the persons who are fighting racism anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And this is actually why I have this situation and I have this trenched in the Swedish public arena, because I'm working against racism based on whatever.
Would you, Mr. Kaplan, go to Malmö and get up there publicly and say to the, what is it, 50,000 Muslims who live there, who have been torching synagogues, who have been attacking Jews, would you stand up and say, okay, you may be critical of Israel, but you dare not attack Jews here in Sweden?
I have already been in Malmö. I was there just 3 days ago, and I was meeting Muslim organization leaders, and we were talking about many things, about the Islamophobia in this community, about the situation with discrimination, but also about the situation with anti-Semitism. And when we are talking about these issues, I can guarantee you that I'm very, very open, and because I think that this society, with the growing so-called Swedish Democrats, it's a right-wing extremist party, who are addressing the Islamophobic views, who are talking about that Muslims and Islam is a threat for Europe and Sweden.
And who, by the way, according to the polls, will probably get into the
Yeah,
parliament.
they are just on the barrage now. They are coming from a culture which was very, very strong anti-Semitic culture, this party. So I think that we have problems both with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in this society. And I think that somebody who is working against racism in total must work with both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
Is Mehmet Kaplan right? Is Swedish criticism of Israeli policies in Gaza legitimate protest? Is their rhetoric unrelated to anti-Semitism and public opinion? We went out into the streets of Stockholm to ask a few Swedes what they think.
In my opinion, what I know from Sweden, I had never have been to Israel, but I think it's really wrong.
What exactly is wrong?
In people in a little community, they can't. You build big walls and stuff around them, and I think that's wrong. But I understand also that I don't know anything because I'm here in Sweden, and I have it really good here, and I don't have any terrorists, and so it's easy to have an opinion. But that's what we learn here.
Do you think that what's happening in Israel affects the way people see the Jewish community here in Sweden?
Not here in Sweden, I don't think. I don't, anyway. I can't speak for everybody, but I don't see anything wrong in the Jewish occupation here in Sweden.
I don't know why they're fighting, but it's just, they want to take Gaza and stuff like that, but I'm not sure. I can't say anything about it because I don't know why. I just think it's annoying.
And does what's happening over there affect the way you feel about the Jews here in Sweden?
We feel nothing. Well, the Jews, they're people, just that they're called Jews. So we have no opinion about them at all.
Lots of things that the Israelis are doing that I don't appreciate, that I don't condone. But I think they're very much in their right to do things to defend themselves and to defend the country they have.
And you are aware, of course, that there is a lot of criticism against Israel here in Sweden, and also a fair amount of anti-Semitism. Do you feel that at all?
I can't say that I feel it, but I know that it's there, and I hear from other people that it is.
What exactly is it that you're hearing?
Oh, it's not easy to. I couldn't really say. But I know of young Swedish Jews who don't want to carry the Star of David, for example, visibly because they're afraid of what's going to happen. And I think Swedish youth should not have to be afraid of things like that, no matter what their background or religion is.
And do you feel that you, as a supporter of Israel, are in a minority here in Sweden?
Yes. Yeah, it has changed. All the way up to the Six-Day War, or even about 1970, most Swedes were supporters of Israel. But then gradually it's changed. And I think that if you study this more closely, you're going to find that part of the stance that people take against Israel is has more to do with anti-Semitism than with the policies of the State of Israel as such.
As we heard, there are people in Sweden who support Israel and have a deep sense of the injustice of the present situation. It's these people who give hope to those who still believe that things will get better here. Do you think the Jewish community in Sweden has a future?
It depends. Of course, you can always live in a bubble, as people do around here. But personally, I think it will be dwindling, both for political reasons and religious reasons. People who will see that a Jewish future is important for the kids, they will leave Sweden either to Israel or to England or to other countries. And I think that the political situation will only worsen with a growing aggressive Muslim population, together with a maybe left-wing political government. But as you know, Jews don't easily learn from the mistakes, so I'm sure that Jews will stay in Sweden also.
So let me ask you a question then. What are you doing here? And how many of you, or of the other Jewish people in Sweden, are talking about leaving, possibly moving to Israel?
Or to Copenhagen. What we're doing here, I'm a child of a survivor. And the majority of the community members are children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents were murdered. I would never, as an individual, I would never ever give in to anything that is threatening the Jews and our existence. We are entitled to live and work wherever we want. And I get so upset. And this is a political battle, and this is to get the recognition. If and when I make Aliyah myself, because that was the dream of my life, it's because I love Israel. It's not because I'm fleeing this country, because I want to feel that my children, if they want to live in Sweden, they should have all the possibilities to do so without feeling threatened. And this is the work we have to do. And that's why I think that if we want, we can be here. If we want to move, it should be for reasons that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Until then, we are going to fight it, because we are never, ever giving in to these dark forces, anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, xenophobic, whatever phobia you may address. So that's why we are here.
Sweden is a country that's proud of its liberal democratic traditions, but it's a country where today many of the Jews living here no longer feel safe. This is Leah Zinder for IBA Close-Up in Stockholm. And here we are back home, and it's certainly good to be home. And so there it is, Sweden 2010. Not what we thought, not a very comfortable place for the Jews living there. The signs are worrying, but as we heard, there are still those who believe the situation there will improve. We'd love to hear what you think. Do write us at ibatvnews@gmail.com. We'd like to thank Israel Up Close, the European Jewish Fund, and Shaul Meislich, and special thanks to my partner in this week's programme, Dennis Zinn. Thank you for watching Close Up. Until next Wednesday at the same time, Shalom from Jerusalem.